Hi everybody, I'm Matt Pierce, your host for today's webinar. We're going to be talking about how enhancing your toolbox, you can enhance your toolbox with Snagit, and how visuals and video can impact learning. So thank you for joining us today. I've been looking in the chat and I see we have a variety of guests from all over the world, literally. So thank you for making time out of your day. We hope we can make this worthwhile. I will say that as we get going here, we do have moderators in the chat. So if you have questions, things that you want answered, feel free to put those into the chat. Both the moderators will be answering those, and they'll be curating questions for us to answer at the end of the presentation. So whether it's a question about the visual piece of it, what we'll be talking about, or if it's about Snagit, or anything else, we'd love to chat with you and learn more. I will be giving at the end of the presentation some contact information. So if you'd like to continue the conversation, we can definitely do that. I have some of it up on screen right now. Feel free to tweet at us. That's my personal handle, PierceMR. And you can obviously tweet at TechSmith if you're on social media. Just to get you started, I want to give you a little bit of my background so you know where I'm coming from. I've actually been at TechSmith for about 10 years, and I've worked heavily with video. My background is in instructional design, so I've actually created training videos for the last decade, which seems crazy and weird. I never thought that would be something that would be true about my professional career. I've also worked in marketing, so I've created more informational and entertainment style videos. And I think that there's a lot of power here that we want to talk about. And so we're going to be talking about some of the science, some things about visuals and video. And then towards the end, we're going to talk about a tool called Snagit. If you're not familiar with it, which I'm sure most of you are, we're going to talk about how that can be used to really enhance what you might be doing with training and learning. So enough about me and enough about kind of the setting the groundwork. So let's go ahead and jump in and start talking about some of these things that I think are important. As we get started, I want you to think about all the tools that you have in your toolbox. And you know, there's probably a large variety. And it doesn't really matter what your tools are. They could be the basic tools like Word or PowerPoint. It might be Microsoft Excel. It could be something more advanced. You might be using something from the Adobe suite or these other tools to create your learning tools. Regardless of what it is, knowing what the tool can do and why it's important, like what it's good for, is really critical. So at home, I've got this project we're undertaking. We've got a friend that's helping us, and we're building a bedroom in the basement for my oldest son. And part of the goal here is to teach my oldest son how to do some of this work. And what's really fascinating is watching him learn the real uses for different tools, like when you use certain types of like a square or a level, and how to use those properly. So regardless of what tools you're using for visuals, what I would recommend is learn what it does well and use it for that purpose. And we're going to talk about some of the things you can do with visuals here. Before we do that real quick, if you aren't familiar with TechSmith, we make a lot of different tools. We make Snagit and Camtasia. We got a tool called Coach's Eye. We have another tool called Relay. And all these tools, they revolve around visuals and video. And so we're strong believers of this. And we hope that you'll come along on this journey with me about why this can be such an important piece of your work. So let's get down to the heart of the matter. Why visuals and why video? Images, video, right? There's a lot of reasons we might want to consider using these tools. But for the most part, it's the depth that they can convey. Words are great, and I don't want anyone to think that this is a silver bullet I'm preaching here or talking about. It's not, but it's an enhancement. When we have text or we have other things that we're doing, we can think about the things and the ways it can become better through these mediums. There's a lot that we can show, a lot we can talk about. You know, one of the things as a professional in the training field that I hear a lot about is learning styles. That, oh, I'm a visual learner or I'm an auditory learner. And while I don't doubt those things, I actually really believe that we're actually all of those things. You might favor a particular style or the other slightly, but there's so much that we can learn from visuals and from video. Even, I think it just enhances what we do. And if we go way, 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 way back in time and we start thinking about things like our ancestors and what they were dealing with visuals. I mean, some of the first communications, right? It wasn't written word. It was images. It was pictures that they were using to convey to one another, to tell stories. And while we often don't think about learning as stories, I think it's very similar, and it's very important that we work with those. So I actually like to think about visuals and video bringing this kind of this well-roundedness and this balance to the learning. Oftentimes if you get a block of text, that can be really instructive. You can read a lot of really great things. But how much clearer and how much deeper can you get if you're enhancing it, especially with images and video? So as we go through here, keep that in mind that really what we're looking for is clarity. We're looking for depth. We're looking for the ability to expand upon what we're already doing. And the things that, like the affordance of visual, of course, you can see a lot. And video, it provides not only this imagery, it provides other contexts as well, such as motion and sound. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. So this is, as I looked, there was an article by Levy and Lentz. And I thought this was a really interesting statistic that people following directions with text and illustrations do 323% better, that's a lot, than people following directions without illustrations. Now, I'm sure in the context of the research, it was very narrowly focused, right? It was about illustrations. But I think we can expand that to other imagery as well, especially when you're thinking about anything that's in this digital box of our computer. Things that are on our screen, things that we want to convey. And I think the reason this is true, that these folks perform so much better with text and illustrations, is because they complement each other. The illustrations can clarify what's going on. If you've ever purchased something, say, from IKEA or any kind of furniture, flat pack furniture that you have to put together yourself, you know how important those illustrations are and how hard it can be to understand text alone. And of course, vice versa, sometimes that illustration isn't very informative without a little bit of text to give you some guidance and direction. I actually remember an experience I had in grad school. I was taking a course on technical writing. And the assignment that we were given was to take a Lego set, it was a small set, but to write instructions to build that Lego set without using any images, and then to test it. And let me tell you, it was one of the hardest assignments I had because it's very difficult to explain, okay, what does this piece look like? Now, where does it go and how does it go on it correctly? So we can see that illustrations are very powerful, especially when we get into instructional context. This is just a little joke that I like that, we hear a lot in the news about robots taking lots of different jobs, and that is actually a serious thing. However, when we're ready to greet our robot overlords, here we go. We have some instructions ready to go. You can, nice firm handshake, and we'll be good to go. Now, this is actually a really interesting article. Wired magazine put this out just about a year ago about why the screenshot is the most important element on the internet. Now, that's a big claim, that the screenshot is actually that important. There's a few things I've called out here, and we'll be sending these slides out, so you'll be able to take some time to read this. But I just want to highlight a thing or two. First of all, the screenshot starts to provide context into this world that pretty much was a kind of one-to-one medium. Even though you're maybe communicating with lots of people, as I look at my screen, I'm the one that sees it. I don't have anyone else here that's seeing the exact same thing I am, unless you're doing something like a webinar or you're taking like a screen capture. So it actually allows for this kind of insight into what's going on our screen. From a learning standpoint, that's really important if you're trying to teach someone how to use a system or to do anything that's in a digital context. It also is great for tech support, right? So if you're going to be doing, you got something's not working, how many times has it happened where it breaks, you call tech support, they say, okay, let me come look at it. They come look at it, and all of a sudden it just works. Well, imagine just an image or a video can actually clarify that and show them this is what really happened, this is why it happened. The other thing, and I thought this was really interesting based on this article, it goes through and talks about how particular authors were using screenshots of text in a medium like Twitter. And it said that it actually, for years, people have been working to kind of create this collaborative reading, if you will. And that through the screenshot, they've actually been able to do this through Twitter. Because now you have a group of people, whether it's your couple hundred followers, or maybe it's gotten broader than that and you've got thousands of followers, and they're all reading this one image and then commenting and interacting. So I thought this was important as we think about the power of images, the things that we could potentially do in our workforces and in our organizations by bringing together this power of the screenshot with the things that we're already doing. We've heard the adage. We've heard it before. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Now, whether you believe that adage or not, it doesn't really matter. What we know is that there's a lot that can be conveyed. And as you think about your training, and I've been there, I worked in a pharmaceutical manufacturing plant about a decade ago, and not a super digital environment, but everything was very visual. We had to show lots of different things, whether it was where to put locks for a lockout tagout to how to sit correctly in a chair for ergonomics. So visuals are really important here, and you can say, again, you can say a lot with a single image. The other thing that I think about with images is that images are persuasive. Now, not all images are persuasive. They're not all created equally, but there's a lot of things that can happen in this, that when you show an image, it can say a lot, and it can mean a lot whether someone's going to listen to it and follow it or they're not. I was going back through some materials, and a couple years ago, I actually had the privilege of interviewing a man by the name of Cliff Atkinson. And Cliff Atkinson is an author, and he wrote a book called Beyond Bullet Points. Now, one of the things that Cliff had the opportunity to work on was he actually worked for a lawyer who was involved in a multi-million-dollar case. It actually ended up being like over a $200 million settlement. And what Cliff worked with this lawyer on was creating the presentation that he was going to use with the jury and that was going to ultimately be deciding the fate of the case. And what struck me is a lot of what he was doing was storytelling, sure, clarifying the message, absolutely, but he was applying visuals that would actually help be persuasive. Now, you think about the legal system, of course there's got to be things like facts and figures. But through using images, he was able to help convey that message and put it with the right lawyer that could speak to those things. And they were able to persuasively speak to the audience, the jury, that here were the facts, here were the things that they needed to know and believe. So there's no doubt in my mind that images can be very persuasive. As we think about from a learning perspective, there's lots of reasons we might want that. One, we might want to convince someone to do something differently, change management. If you can convey that, hey, this will be better than this, and we can do that, use images to help show that, that's really, really important. And maybe even with video, you could think about, well, they might say, well, it's not going to be as fast, it's not going to be as efficient, or whatever their excuse might be. You can use that medium, again, to help show the actual process or to convince them of a certain process and that it will be better, or it won't be as hard, or it won't be as difficult. So Wharton School of Business found that 50% of the audience in this particular study that they did were persuaded by purely verbal presentation. 50% is pretty good. However, 67% of the audience were persuaded by verbal presentation that had accompanying visuals. I think learning is it's something that I think we're often persuaded to learn something, whether we want it to stick or not. Obviously, there's lots of reasons why we don't remember things, getting it into our short-term memory to long-term memory. But the more persuasive we can make it, the more we can make it memorable, the easier it will be over the long run for our audience to really take in that learning. Now, obviously, you have to be mindful about what images you're using. Some, step-by-step pieces, take different types of imagery than if you're trying to be purely persuasive. So be mindful of that. But I think there's this nice correlation there that as we work on being persuasive in our learning, getting people to try to remember it, wanting them to remember it, that using visuals can actually move us along quite nicely. So as we've been going, if you have questions, again, please put them in the chat. We're going to be looking and answering them here soon. We've been talking a lot about images in general, and I've thrown in a little bit about video, but videos, I think, it's the thing I get really excited about and really passionate about because it's something I love, and it's something I've been doing for a long time. There's lots of types of video. Primarily today, we're going to be talking about screen video, although with devices such as iPhones, Android, video has become more accessible than ever, right? So we can actually use that to help us to create our stories, to help create our training content, and put it into whatever medium or whatever format that we're using to deliver that, whether it's just in our LMS, whether it's in our PowerPoint, whether it's in some other format that you're delivering, some other authoring tool. One of the things that's interesting about video is the rapid growth that we've seen in the last 5 years. In one report from Cisco that I've seen recently, it was 2015, they're actually projecting that 80% of all consumer internet traffic in the year 2019 will be video. It's a lot of the internet traffic. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that, right? Video tend to be larger than the written word. It's larger than images, so that could be part of the reason. However, we see this inclination to go to video. It's becoming a much more acceptable and accessible medium for people. If you're like me, you've probably watched Netflix at least once in the last week. And that's not something we would have considered 5 years ago, is that there's video kind of on demand all the time. Now, that doesn't mean it's a good reason to use it. However, I think as we see more and more people consuming more and more media and more video, that it's something that we're going to want to make sure we're using appropriately, that we're using it to augment and to add to the things that we're doing, and finding the right times when it's going to actually be the primary delivery method for our learning, because I think it can be really impactful. Again, if you have things like motion and movement, that video is going to be great because those are hard to describe in words alone, especially when you can show it in a short time rather than using lots of words to do so. So let's talk a little bit more about video. This is something that, again, I don't know if if it actually works out, but let's talk through this. So a typical video is 30 frames per second. Now, there's lots of variations. If you go to theater, you can look at different things here, but typically it's 30 frames per second. And if we have a video that's 30 frames per second, and we've got 1,000 frames, or we get 30,000 actual little tiny images that piece together and make a video. So 1 minute of video here works to about 1.8 million words for 1 minute of video. That's a lot. Now, is that really going to be comparable? Probably not. Again, this is for a kind of fun illustration to think about. I want you to think about the real kind of strength of video and how much you can convey in a short period of time. And if you do a longer presentation, how much more you can convey. Now, longer is not always better. We did some research at TechSmith in the last couple of years, and we looked at what was an acceptable length of video for instructional videos in particular. You could look at entertainment, and those, most people like 60 seconds or an hour. They like the long movies. However, for instructional videos, we saw an average that people were acceptable to about 7 minutes worth of video. I would recommend, if you can go shorter, do that. But if you're going to go much longer, really consider the content, because the other factor that played into this study where they were basically self-selecting how long were they willing to watch a video. The other thing is they had to be interested in it, or it had to be useful to their job. And so if we're going to be making video, we also want to do that as well. So I do see a question here. It said 80% of the internet traffic will be video. What year would that be happening? That's in 2019. So just a couple years from now. So thank you for that question. All right, so another little fun slide here. And I think it's relative to thinking about pictures and images and the way it can be persuasive and the way it can be helpful. So adding pictures and mentioning cognitive neuroscience make people more inclined to believe what they're reading. Now, whether that's good or not, whether you want to convince them, that's okay. But here, now I've got a picture right here, cognitive metascience behind my background. Let's talk about this, because I want you guys to believe this and understand this. So the thing about video, why I think it's even more powerful than just images standing alone, because you have the images, and your brain can take that in. You can handle that visual stimulus. You can bring it in, process it, and understand it. Your brain is actually capable of taking a second stream, an audio stream, and bringing it in and processing that as well. So we can take these two streams, bring them together, and understand with greater complexity whatever's being presented to us. Now, there's definitely some caveats that I think are really important to think about if you're going to use video. A lot of us want to make really flashy, fancy kind of videos, and that's great. It's a lot of fun to do that. However, if you're bringing in a visual, and you're bringing in audio, say your voice narration, and then you bring in a music track, it starts to get a little dicey because your brain then has two audio sources that it has to process, and it's not good at separating those. And so it has a hard time really parsing it out. Now, we see lots of videos, marketing videos in particular, entertainment, they use music successfully. Probably less important because the message isn't as deep or not, we don't have to focus as much to try to understand it. So something to think about though, that our brains are really wired in this crazy complex way, and I'm not a neuroscientist, I don't understand lots and lots about the brain, but as I was out doing research, this is something that came up that I think is really important, that when we have video and we couple it with images, it's going to be better understood than just video on its own, just motion and movement. And it can also add to the dynamics and complexity of just audio as well. So really something I think is neat about what we're capable of, and why, again, video is so important. I mean, we think about something like today's event. You're watching me, looking at my screen, and you're hearing my voice, hopefully clearly, and the stream is good. But that's pretty standard. We do that in day-to-day conversations. Our brains are wired to handle that. But start throwing in other stimulus. It's something, you know, the lights back here were flashing, or there was somebody else trying to talk to you as you watched the presentation today. Just think about how difficult that might be to process and understand. This was something else I thought was interesting about video, is when we're reading text, it's a very active process, and that's a good thing. And I don't want to downplay the being active, but video it tends to be passive. We just are kind of soaking it in like sponges. But our brain really likes that. It says, oh, I'm going to take a break. In fact, there was this interesting fact I heard recently that, I don't know how they figure this out, but basically the brain uses less energy than the light bulb in your refrigerator. So that's not to say how bright we are or how smart we are, but what it says is that it's low powers and it works looking for shortcuts. It tries to shortcut. So we have a limited focus and attention span. And so when we're taking in video, the brain goes on, not autopilot per se, but it goes into this passive mode and takes it in. Of course, there's things that you can do to enhance that, to make it a bit more active by, you know, asking questions, getting the learner engaged. But I don't want you to think of this as a good thing, bad thing. I want you to just understand that as we're looking at this stuff, this is how the brain is processing it, and it is different. So one of the things I think video really provides is this, again, and we've talked a lot about this, so I won't kind of rehash, but depth and clarity. We can really get a lot deeper with our content. Now it takes structure and it takes you know, thinking about what you're going to show, what you're going to say, but it's really allows us to do much more in, like, say, again, a minute of video than a single image or even a short series of images. Now this is one of my favorite things about video. As you're sitting here and listening to me, hopefully you can understand me, right? You can not from a language standpoint, but you can understand that maybe I'm excited or I'm interested in talking to you. You also can tell that I'm not angry or upset. This happens a lot, especially with email, right? And I'll get into a demo here shortly where, you know, we get these long emails. Maybe it's from a boss, maybe it's from a coworker, and they're questioning something or criticizing something. And what do? We read that message in our voice, in our head, the way we interpret it. And we might be thinking that they're grumpy with us or mad at us, or maybe we've had an off day and we're just reading things and everything is down. Or maybe we're super happy and we're putting that spin on it too, not realizing what they really meant is that we need to shape up. Cool thing about video is, especially if you're using camera video, but even without camera video, you can start to get this intent. You know, you can read a lot better the emotion that's coming through. And, you know, is this something I should be paying attention to? Is this kind of joking? Is he upset, or is he grumpy, or is he mad? Whatever it might be, you're going to understand that a lot better than just if we leave a note. It's often like I write notes for my wife, and, you know, if she's grumpy with me that day, she reads it as grumpy. And video is great because we can clarify that, right? We can understand that tone. Now, I want to talk, we're coming close to getting into some demos of Snagit here and answering any other questions, but I want to talk about a story about a company called Virgin Media. You've probably heard of the name Virgin Media. They're a telecommunication provider in the UK, and they had a problem. in their organization. They're a large organization, probably about 15,000 people. And they do lots of different things, and they had some technology. And this technology was older. As a lot of organizations, we find ourselves in the situation where, it doesn't really pay to upgrade it or change it, but we need to maintain it. And they had this problem where they were going to have people starting to leave the organization. They were going to retire. And then when they retired, they were taking with them all the knowledge and expertise that they'd built up, which meant that they weren't going to be able to support certain systems. They weren't going to be able to fix them or recover them if needed. They weren't going to be able to continue moving forward with them. So 150 people were set to retire. And they knew that was unacceptable, that knowledge could not leave the organization. They wanted the people to retire. They'd earned it. However, they did not want to lose that knowledge. So as you can imagine, this could be a lot of our scenarios, whether it's someone that's retiring, maybe someone just moving on to another job, maybe tragedy falls on someone on the team, or maybe they just move to a new role. It doesn't matter why, but knowledge leaves organizations all the time. And this was Virgin Media's problem. They also knew that people weren't sharing knowledge, that maybe coworker Sally down the cubicle hall had a piece of knowledge that would really help out Joe on the other side, but that wasn't getting shared. And so they wanted to figure out what to do. And so they've actually implemented, using Snagit and other tools, to start this internal knowledge sharing program. So they really started small with 150 people and got them to capture the knowledge before they left on their retirement. And then they said that worked so well that they spread it out to 15,000 people to capture that knowledge and to share it. It actually comes down to a couple people. One of the guys, and he's become a friend of mine. I've gotten to spend some time with him, Caston McRae, fantastic gentleman. Him and his coworker actually tell the story way better than I do. So we're going to watch a quick video. And when we come back, we're going to actually go into showing off some of Snagit, what it can do, and how great it is. So let's cut to that video right now and hear Virgin Media's problem, about their problem and how they solved it.
We were initially approached by our training and development colleagues to look at a way of capturing the knowledge of 150 people within Virgin Media who were coming up to retirement and had some quite vital information in their heads, how to use various parts of our network, how to operate certain servers, for instance. So we went away and looked at a tool where we could use video to capture that information.
To create that material involved documenting the process and taking a lot of screenshots to represent to the users where they were going to be on the process and what they had to click. For that we use Snagit.
We've already had some great uses of Snagit. People creating videos, people using it for creating screenshots.
And we drew attention to key buttons using the call-out feature.
The feedback has been fantastic. It's sped up the way that they can turn this kind of material around. But being Virgin Media, we kind of weren't happy with sticking with 150 people. So we expanded that to 15,000 people across the workforce and deployed that tool across all of those machines. What can be conveyed in a 3-minute video is so much information that we can't convey by writing that down. Video allows us to capture and share tacit knowledge, the knowledge that's in the head of a lot of our people who are very experienced at what they do. This is the next phase that we're moving into, is to kind of establish a platform to ask questions, to get your questions answered, by other users who are experts, using video or using screenshots, and to open up a kind of whole set of behaviours around that, so we know that we can get to the people who hold that key knowledge for us much quicker.
My name's Adrian Lord.
I'm Caston McRae. I work for Virgin Media and I use Snagit.
I just love their story because it's a story of empowerment. It's a story of sharing. And they've really embraced this idea of the power of visuals and video to share knowledge. And They'll be the first to admit to you that not everything's working perfectly the way they want, especially getting the sharing happening within the organization, but they're working on it. And what they found is that because tools like Snagit are so easy to use, they're making progress, and they're actually being able to see great results. So with that, I want to talk about Snagit, because it is one of the reasons we're here today is not only to talk about visuals and video, but how can we get there? Because through my journey of my career, I've realized that I've been really blessed. I've been exposed to lots and lots of information about video and visual, and have had a lot of time to craft and work on my craft to become better at it. But I know it's difficult at times. It can be really challenging. But I've been lucky because I've had Snagit for the last decade to help me along this path, and I'm here to say that it's a great tool. If you're already using Snagit, I hope you'll pick up some tips today. If you're not using Snagit, I'd encourage you to check it out, and hopefully you'll see some of the things that it can do to make it really much more powerful. So let me just start with the assumption, because I can't see you guys, I can't get a raise of hands. Let me just say, how many of you are using Snagit? Great. You can put it in the chat. We'd love to know. We'd love to hear it. But if you're not using Snagit, it is a way to capture your screen, both images, and if you didn't know, it can also do video. And we'll talk about some of the limitations with video here in a minute. But it can do those two things, and then you can edit and easily share out that content. But one of the things I love about Snagit is it actually helps you become this digital creation superhero, because you can do a ton of things very easily. Even if you're using other tools, I actually like to use tools like Illustrator and Photoshop and others. However, I often find myself coming back to Snagit for many things just because it's so easy and so quick. I'm always capturing things on my screen. I'm making videos to share with people on how to do things. I don't ever have to really spend a lot of time figuring out how to use this program. I just do it, which saves me so much time. It saves me a lot of energy and effort. Whereas some of those other tools, I love them, but I have to spend a lot of time figuring out, now, how do I do that? The other way I think Snagit is really important is not so much, of course, as a standalone tool, it's awesome and powerful. But when you start pairing it with these other tools, and this is just a small sample, give you a flavor. But any tool that's digital, you can start thinking about how Snagit, those images you can create, the video that you can create, can work with it, whether it's actually showing off that piece of digital content. Whether you're working in PowerPoint, you could teach someone how to use PowerPoint, or you're using visuals to enhance your PowerPoint. It works both ways, and it's fantastic. So as we're going through this, don't think of Snagit just as a standalone tool. It definitely is, and you can do it. But it's really superpowers come out when you start working with other tools and using the content you create in Snagit to enhance what you're doing elsewhere. That's where it's really super powerful. So hopefully you're using Snagit. If not, we'll provide a link at the end where you can get your free download and try it out. I want to talk about a couple of examples here, because I think we could talk and show just here's how you do a capture, here's how you do video, and we'll do that lightly. But what I really want to talk about is a couple scenarios. So to give you an idea of the breadth and kind of the depth of things we could do, because I think far too often we think just snag an image, edit it, put it into our PowerPoint. That's a simple example. But let's think of this example, kind of what Virgin Media was doing with working with subject matter experts. That's something that my team that creates the training materials for TechSmith does. We have to learn the software before it's even done being built. And we have to work with subject matter experts to understand how that is and what it can do and what's the best workflow. But in other scenarios, when I was working, I mentioned the pharmaceutical manufacturing plant, I am not an engineer. I didn't know a lot about certain health and safety systems that they were using and working with. So I was often going out to the subject matter expert to capture their knowledge. In one example, there was a gentleman, and he was a fantastic guy and had a lot of knowledge. And they were trying to move him around within the organization, and he knew everything about water purification and their entire system. And he was about the only guy that knew everything. And it was my job to go and capture that knowledge and turn it into a training course so that others could learn how to use that process. In those days, I only wish I had Snagit so we could actually capture some of the knowledge. So let me do this here. Let me go to my computer, and I want to walk through an example. So I happen to run a podcast called The Backstory Project that, if I want to work with someone else, I'd have to teach them how to use the back end. I use a WordPress server. So I'm going to drop out of my presentation here. Oops, go back. I'm going to switch to just here. I've got Firefox open because it's a web tool. So I've got my dashboard here for doing this. And let's say I want to share with someone. Maybe they're going to administer my backend. I want to maybe teach them how to update a plugin. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find Snagit. I'm on a Windows machine. If you're on a Mac, you could do the same thing. We have Snagit for Mac. And I've got a couple things here. This is my capture window. And I can start a new capture. I can actually see some profiles. Those are if I want to change to some specific kind of recipes. For now, I'm just going to keep it very simple, though. I'm going to say start a new capture. And I get these orange crosshairs. And so this is basically going to show me what area I'm going to capture. So let's say I want to do a step-by-step written guide. I just click my mouse, my left mouse button, and I can drag. And anything that's within those crosshairs, you can see it's more lit up. That is what's going to be captured. So I just pull it over here. Let's say I do that. I let go. It's going to ask me if I want to do an image or if I want to do video. And we'll talk about video in a second. Click image. And boom, I've got my first step in this process. And then once I'm in Snagit, there's so many things I could do. So I could ask my subject matter expert actually if they had Snagit. I could get them Snagit and say, hey, could you go through and just capture the process here of what steps you need to do to update this. So really, it's just a matter of if we're creating documentation, going step by step and adding clarity. Now, one of the things that I might want to do once I take a couple captures is start enhancing these images. Now, the subject matter expert wouldn't have to do this, right? You don't have to ask them to do everything. But maybe if this was a much more complicated system or more maybe finely nuanced, you might ask them to do a couple things. Like maybe they can add an arrow. Or if there's sensitive information, one of my favorite things is I could add a blur. So let's blur that out so you don't see my provider. Let's move this guy around here. So the cool thing is once you're in the editor, I can go through this process. Now, good enough here, I can go in here. I can actually do a whole bunch of other things I want to show that I've maybe taken this out of context here. So let's do this guy. And all these settings are adjustable. If you're not used to using these settings, you're just doing basic capture, putting in your documentation, that's great. Now, of course, the subject matter expert, let's say you get them to do these screen captures. They're going through, they take a bunch of them. Then what? How are you going to get them from their machine to yours? Classic conundrum, right, of what do we do? Up here, you've got several different tabs. And there's this Share tab. And in the Share tab, depending on what you're doing, you'll have several different options available to you. So I say several different options because it depends. So like this is an image, but I can't share an image to YouTube, so it's grayed out essentially. But here I could actually ask my subject matter expert to just maybe save them, or I could actually have them put them on Google Drive. If you're a Google Drive user, you could put them in Dropbox. Really, depending on what your needs are, you can have them easily share it out. You can even set it up so that it can automatically be saved to a path. Like let's say you have a network drive. So you could put that in and it can really easily output it there. If you're using FTP, whatever it might be. So that's just one example, right? Think about getting your subject matter experts to share their knowledge through the captures that they do. So as we're looking at that, let me just move my notes ahead here. Yes, one of the other things, so as subject matter experts, you probably know, you might be one of those. You might know how to do a pivot table in Excel. You might know how to do something in Word. You might be the guru, the master, whatever it might be. And you get the same question over and over. So it's not about gathering new knowledge. It's about stopping the repetitive process of answering the same question. So same thing can happen. In this case, let me back up here. So I'll go to my dashboard. And I go to Snagit. And this time I'm going to do a similar thing here. I'm going to capture a region. I think it's going to be about this big. And this time, rather than doing an image capture, I'm going to do a quick video capture. It's going to count down. It's going to capture my microphone. Hello, everybody. And this is how you update a plugin for your WordPress site. You go to Updates, And then you go to here and click Update Plugins. If you want to see what's new about it, you can click on this right here. Now, I'm not going to do that right now. However, what I get back is a video. And this video, again, I can put this wherever I might need to. I can host it on, maybe a local network drive. If you have access to YouTube, you could put it there. Google Drive, Dropbox. We also have a site called screencast.com you could host it on. Or if you want to do more editing and you happen to be a Camtasia Studio user, you can actually send it through to edit maybe multiple clips together. But what I like about the video is you can't do everything. You can't do as much as you can with video editors like Camtasia. I can actually go through here and play it back. So we
WordPress site, you go to updates, and then you go.
And let's say there's part of it, maybe I made a mistake, or maybe at the end I was saying, I'm not going to actually do that, and I want to cut that out. So I've got this little green mark here on the playhead, and I've got this red mark on the playhead. And I can actually click and move those. I can drag it out, and when I do, I get this option to cut. And what that's going to do is actually cut out this piece of the video. It's very light editing that we can do. So I go ahead and cut, and when I'm done, you'll see it's probably really hard to see on the screen, but there's a little yellow marker saying that I've actually removed that piece. So now I can go through and I could cut out other pieces of my video as well. So while it's not big editing, you can go through and get a quick take. And imagine your subject matter expert going through this and just recording what they know about a system or tool or whatever. Maybe it's a schematic or whatever it might be that you're working with on the screen. That can be super, super powerful. The other thing I like about video and why I'm such a fan of Snagit video is, let's say I still want that step-by-step guide, because remember, there was a study that said written and illustrations together are super persuasive and super interesting. I can actually go through here, and let's say I want this as my first step. So I line it up at the spot I want. Let's get up here where my mouse cursor is by the updates. And then down here, right under the length of the video, there's a little picture icon. And when I click on that, I'm going to hover over it right now. It says capture frame. When I click on it, though, it actually takes that frame and turns it into a still image that I can then work with and enhance in Snagit. So now I could go through. Let me just do another one here. Let me move a little bit forward. And I click. And now I've got two images that can be used in a step-by-step guide. And if there was multiple steps, so for instance on the second image I took, I can actually come up here to the step tool, which is going to give me these steps, and automate the process of numbering. So you can take one image and actually update that so they can follow step by step within a single image. And I also have the video that could accompany it. So your learner could actually have multiple things to choose from. So pretty cool, if I think so at least. Something I found really handy. And because Snagit video is pretty simple, I find if you're in any kind of experience where you have to answer a customer directly, you can make them a quick video without a lot of investment. And let me tell you, the personalization of that is huge. And people are amazed that you will have spent a few minutes to create them a video. They'll probably think it takes a long time when you know it probably just took you the actual length of saying it versus, maybe I'm a slow typer, but rather than the 20 minutes agonizing over every word of the email so it won't be somehow misunderstood or will be perfectly clear. So let me move on to another example here. So we talked about subject matter experts real quick. And let's call this what I call the email of War and Peace. We've been there. You've gotten really long documents, right? We talked about tone and intention earlier, and you've read into it and you feel rotten because you just think they're really maybe upset with you. Or it just doesn't feel right. You're reading into it incorrectly. Those can be difficult. So think about using Snagit to actually enhance those emails. If you have to be the sender of one, can you actually clarify your message more quickly and be more understood? So for instance, let's say we're talking about a website. And let me bring up our website, TechSmith.com. And maybe I want to give some feedback to my team about tutorials. And let me get to this page here. So I've got this page, and there's a lot going on here. And I know it's going to be a really long email. So instead of maybe doing an email, I can actually come here. I'm going to click the capture button again. I'm just going to hover over here. And it's going to, you'll notice at the bottom kind of the screen down here, there's this little box. And as I hover over it, it says capture vertical scrolling area. So I'm going to scroll this web page. We're going to try it out. Sometimes it does struggle sometimes, but this looks like it's going to work just great. And it's going to bring that whole web page into my editor. So now, as I scroll down here, you can see I can actually go through, and rather than typing out like, okay, about this graphic, of course you still might want to do some of that, but I can start to come in here and start to provide more clarity and depth, specifically about the things that maybe need to get changed. So let's say I just draw this text box here. Of course, I can make sure I'm highlighting. Let's do this. And then I can just come in here and I can type up the information that I want. Let's update this graphic. We won't go into too much detail because that's not the fun part of a webinar, is watching me type. So we got this here. We can actually start going through. Even if we don't want to get that complicated, I find that I was working just on this project the other day. We're looking at new visuals. We're going through, and my coworker, she needed to give me which ones did she like, which ones she didn't like, which ones weren't working for it. And we just started going through and using the line to start scratching things out. So instead of writing a really long email explaining, get rid of this heading, you can actually show people. Now again, with that same case, you can use video, right? They can hear your voice, they can hear your intention. So things to keep in mind. Let me go here, full screen again, and okay, so I won't go into an example here because I want to make sure we're leaving plenty of time for questions, but if you're familiar with Ebbinghaus's learning curve, there's been several things written lately about it. In particular, there's a gentleman by the name of Art Cohn that's done presentations at some of the major learning conferences. He's got some articles out there. If you search for Art Cohn Boost Learning, you'll find those articles. Basically, the idea is that after this webinar is done, within hours, you're going to start to forget a lot of it. Within a day or two, you've forgotten most of it. And within a week, well, we're hopeful for 10%. But his notion is that if you can get this repetitive kind of scheduled kind of information dumps going back in, like asking questions or doing things to get them to remember on a repetitive schedule, like 2 days after, or a week after, or 4 weeks after, we can actually increase the learning. And as I've been thinking about this, a lot of it's getting you to recall the information. What a great way to actually do that, rather than if you're going to say we did a presentation about something here. Let's go here to maybe about this castle. Maybe we're learning about architecture or something really interesting. And we come in here and we say, okay, well, we have lots of other information. Can we just do a quick capture here and grab something? And maybe this is enough to boost your learning. And because what we don't want to do is maybe provide all the information. So we come in here and actually let me get an arrow. What is this? Just again, the idea being use in your learning process, use visuals and images beyond just documentation or just enhancements. Use it as a fundamental way to communicate and really create these building blocks that are going to get you beyond just the basic kind of, hate to say it, dump and run kind of visual, right? Like, here's your learning, now let's move on to the next thing. And I realize in a lot of corporate environments, it's really tough, right? Because you want to enhance their learning, you want them to walk away, but the schedule keeps turning. But think about it. How can we use these visuals, the video, to continue to move forward? All right, almost done here. As we go, so we got that last idea. This is another one I'm really a big fan of. So we've been there, we have meetings, lots of information. And sometimes, though, we wonder, do we have to be meeting? Do we always have to have a meeting? Or is it, if you're like me, sometimes you go into meetings and you wonder, why didn't I know this before I got to the meeting? So again, using the tools that we've got, and I've shown you very little of Snagit, right? There's lots more that we can do specifically, but imagine we're going to have a meeting and I could actually pre-record some of the thoughts or ideas I'm going to present. In fact, we could have done that today. We could have maybe recorded the first half of this webinar and said, please go watch this. We're going to meet together and then you can ask questions. think about how powerful that would be of a potential time saver for those who are learning from you. Now, the concept out there has a name called flipped learning. It works in education. We've seen lots of great examples of it working in business. And of course, it's not free. It's not that you're just saving time, but you might be saving time doing something that could be done when they're on their own. They can be taking in the information. They can be processing. We have a meeting that happens every Monday morning at TechSmith. And there's been several times when really important information has been given, and then we've been asked, are there any questions? And it's really quiet. No one has questions. But it's also the first time they've heard the information. And I know if you're like me, I sometimes need to take a little time to process. And so what I'd recommend is, hey, let's flip that on its head, give people the information, and then when we come to our meetings, we can discuss. And that could be video. That could be images. And like I said, Snagit is it's really flexible, really powerful. There's so much we can do. I've only scratched the surface here on terms of demos. However, there's lots of ways you can learn. If you want to learn more about Snagit, one of my recommendations is actually coming back out here. If you go to TechSmith to help, we have a lot of free tutorials. We'd love you to check those out, learn more about Snagit. In fact, I'm going to give you my email address, and if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer those. And if I can't answer it, we'll move on. I'll get it on to someone who can answer those questions. But before we give you that information, if you're not a Snagit user already or using any of TechSmith's other products, we'd love you to check us out. It's free. You can try it out. You can see what it's going to do and how it might enhance your learning or enhance the learning of those that you're responsible for. You can just go to TechSmith.com, search for Snagit, and I'm sure you'll find it. And now this will be going out in the links out there, so if you're not able to write this down fast enough, no worries. We'll get you that information here in an email follow-up. So last thing here, again, this is my contact information. I've given you my Twitter. That's probably the best way, but my email address is here too, m.pierce@techsmith.com. If you email me, I'll do my best to get you an answer, help you out with whatever I can. I love to connect with others in the community. So, check me out on Twitter, follow me, or go ahead and email me. Like I said, if you have questions about sales, look, we've got people that can answer that. You got technical questions that are, something's not working, let us know. We've got people that can answer that. If you've got other things that you want to know about visuals and images, I'd love to have a dialogue beyond just what we've talked about today. Maybe I've gotten something not quite right, or maybe you've got an idea like, hey, what about this? Did you see this research? I'd love to know about it. So with that said, if you have questions, you have thoughts, things that you would like to ask, go ahead. We've got lots of room in the chat, in the document that they're sending to me. So we'd love to hear any. So moderators, any other questions for us today? Anything you guys want to, feel free to open the door. And we got Dave Patton's just off camera, and I'll repeat his question so you guys can hear it. But
if you share these on a network drive, do the others viewing it also need Snagit, or can they see it anyway?
So the question is, if you're sharing this on a network drive, can others see it? That's a really good question. So if you save it out as a standard image format or video format, which would be like a JPEG, GIF, or GIF, depending on how you say it, those will be easily viewable by anyone. Video would be an MP4 format. Now, if you save it in the Snagit format, which allows you to edit it later, they would need Snagit to see that. But for the most part, you can save it out in one of those standard formats, and that will work. What you lose is, again, the ability to edit that particular version of it. So good question.
From Anon6361, I want captions with more than one pointer.
Captions with more than one pointer. So I can only assume what we're talking about is like arrows or text boxes. That's great feedback. I happen to know on the Mac version, like the text call-out boxes, you can do that. It's not something that we support on the Windows, but I know where the product manager sits. It's right across from my office. That's feedback I am happy to give him.
And then last question we have right now is just wondering, are there plans in the future to allow text overlay over video clips?
So the question is there plans for the future to allow text overlay over video clips? I don't think that's something that we've talked about. What I'd actually be interested in knowing is kind of what you would hope to be able to do with that and why you'd want that. I know that's definitely something you could do in Camtasia. You could actually add either captions or you could actually put in text. Right now, to be honest, the Snagit video editor is as an editor, it's very light. What we want to maintain with Snagit video is that it's simple, easy, quick to use. We're not trying to create another full kind of version editor. But it's a really interesting thing. One thing that I will say that's from kind of a science cognitive learning standpoint, if you've got lots of motions on the screen and you're making people read, that can also, remember 2 streams, that would be 2 visual streams, what's going on the screen plus text, that can become very difficult to follow along. It's not impossible, but you don't want to overload your learner by doing that. So that's probably from a best practice standpoint something I would think carefully about, although obviously captions are something that get used and are definitely easy to follow along. It's really about what's on the screen and what are you writing. So good questions. Well, I think we're just about out of time here. If you have questions, again, you've got my contact information. I'd love to hear from you, love your feedback, and we'd love to hear if you have suggestions or ideas for Snagit and our other tools. So thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your busy week to tune in, to watch this, to spend a little bit of time with me. And we hope that we'll see you soon. And again, I hope to hear from each and every one of you. Thank you.